The cold came first. Not the bullet, not the fear, the cold. Lieutenant Kara Brennan had been lying in the abandoned apartment for 72 hours, and the Alaskan winter had worked its way through every layer of her gear past the thermal blanket beyond the insulated mat straight into her bones. Minus 28 degrees Fahrenheit at over 500 hours. The kind of cold that made breathing hurt, that turned exhaled moisture into ice crystals before they hit the ground 6 stories below. Through her scope, she watched 381 Navy SEALs enter the town they called Blackstone Ridge. She was the only person who knew they were walking into a trap. The scope's reticle remained steady despite the tremor in her hands, professional training overriding biological reality. Kara had maintained this position since Tuesday night. It was Friday morning now, watching, waiting, hoping the intelligence was wrong. Hoping the abandoned mining settlement really was abandoned. Hoping this would be the quiet Overwatch mission Command had promised when they'd given her the assignment. She'd stopped hoping an hour ago. The town spread below her like a corpse laid out for examination. 2-story buildings with collapsed roofs. A main street buried under 8 months of undisturbed snow. Windows like empty eye sockets. The kind of place people left and never thought about again. Officially abandoned when the water system failed. Officially forgotten. But Kara had counted 62 thermal signatures in the past 12 hours. 62 heat sources moving with tactical precision between buildings that were supposed to be empty. 62 ghosts in a dead town. She'd reported it 3 times. Each time the voice on her radio call sign cipher, a handler she'd never met, had told her the same thing. Maintain observation, do not engage, your assessment is noted. Now the SEALs were here, and noting her assessment wasn't going to stop what was about to happen. Kara adjusted her position by millimeters. The rifle, a customized M110 with suppressor and thermal scope, was an extension of her body after 3 days. She knew every scratch on the stock, every minute adjustment in the zero. She'd checked it 17 times. Not because it needed checking, because checking gave her something to do besides think. Thinking was dangerous. Thinking led to Syria. She pushed the memory down, concentrated on the scope. The SEALs moved in textbook formation, 4-man teams spread across a 2-mile perimeter. Professional, careful, exactly how the manual said to do it, which meant exactly how the enemy would expect them to do it. Commander Marcus Kane led the central element. Kara had studied his file during the mission brief. 38 years old, 16-year career, 3 Bronze Stars, 1 Silver Star. The kind of officer who led from the front, the kind of leader men followed into hell. He was about to get that chance. Kara keyed her radio. Cipher Reaper. Visual confirmation on friendly element. They're entering the kill zone. The response came through layers of encryption and satellite delay. Copy Reaper. Maintain observation posture. Confirm your status. Position secure, visibility good, temperature minus 28 and falling. Weather forecast shows storm system moving in ETA 1700 hours. Understood. Remember your parameters. Observation only. Do not engage without authorization. Kara released the transmit button without responding. They'd told her that part 11 times already. Once in the mission brief, 3 times during infiltration, 7 times since she'd started reporting thermal anomalies. Do not engage. Watch. Report. Let the professionals on the ground handle the tactical situation. Except the professionals on the ground didn't know what she knew. Didn't see what she could see from 2 kilometers away and 6 stories up. Didn't understand that every step forward was a step deeper into a web that had been 3 months in the weaving. She'd chosen this hide with care. The building was structurally condemned, marked with orange safety tags and warnings in 3 languages. No one looked at ruins when intact structures were available. The 6th floor gave her sightlines across 80% of the town. The corner apartment position provided 2 escape routes, and the very fact that it was officially unsafe meant no one would think to search it. Kara Brennan had learned a long time ago that the best place to hide was somewhere everyone had already decided to ignore. The first SEAL element reached the Main Street intersection. She recognized Chief Petty Officer Dylan Thorne on point, tall, methodical, 10 years in the teams. Good operator. He took a knee behind a rusted sedan half buried in snow, hand signals crisp even through the scope's magnification. Thorne's head turned left-right scanning. Then he went still, the kind of stillness that meant something was wrong. Kara watched him key his radio. Couldn't hear the transmission, but she could read body language. The way his shoulders tensed, the way his rifle came up by 2 inches, the way the operators behind him shifted from relaxed patrol to active threat assessment. They felt it, the wrongness, the silence that was too silent. She'd felt it too 72 hours ago when she'd first glassed the town. No birds, no animal tracks in the snow, no signs of life except those 62 thermal signatures moving with purpose between buildings that were supposed to be empty. Kara had learned to trust that feeling in sniper school. The instructors called it situational awareness. The operators called it the lizard brain. The old-timers called it the voice of everyone who'd ever survived by paying attention. Right now, that voice was screaming. She watched Kane's element advance, watched the noose tighten, watched the geometry of the trap become clear from her elevated position even as the men on the ground remained blind to it. 3-story apartment blocks lined the main street. Perfect sniper positions, overlapping fields of fire, interlocking sectors that would turn every intersection into a fatal funnel. She'd seen this before, not in person, in the manuals. Soviet doctrine, Spetsnaz urban warfare tactics from the 80s updated for modern equipment. Someone down there had studied the same books she had. Someone down there knew exactly what they were doing. The cold made her eyes water. She blinked away the moisture before it could freeze. Kept watching. 0604 hours. The timestamp burned green in the corner of her scope's display. She'd remember that number for the rest of her life. The shot came from Building 7, 4th floor window, 400 meters from Kane's position, and 620 meters from hers. Kara saw the muzzle flash before she heard the report suppressed but not silent. A flat crack that echoed wrong in the frozen air. Through her scope, she watched Petty Officer Jackson Hayes spin and go down. Shoulder wound. The young SEAL, 23 years old, new father, she'd memorized all their files, hit the ground behind a concrete barrier. Blood on the snow, bright red against white. The trap was sprung. Kara's training took over. Locate the shooter, confirm the threat, assess the situation. Her scope swept to Building 7, found the window, tracked the thermal signature pulling back from the firing position. Then she saw the others. Windows lighting up across the entire town, thermal blooms in buildings that were supposed to be empty. Not one shooter. Not 5. 15 positions. 20. 30. She kept counting, kept tracking, her mind cataloging each location with mechanical precision even as her stomach turned to ice. 40 positions. 50. 60. 62. Every building she'd flagged in the past 72 hours was now active. 62 shooters coordinating with military precision. 62 trained operators executing an ambush that had been planned down to the last detail, and 381 Navy SEALs walking right into the center of it. Kara's finger found the radio transmit button. This time she didn't hesitate. Cypher Reaper enemy force confirmed 60 plus hostiles, coordinated sniper network SEALs are in a kill box. I repeat, this is an ambush. The radio crackled. Reaper, confirm your count. Confirmed 62 active positions. They've been waiting. They knew we were coming. A different voice cut through. Older. Command authority. Reaper, this is Task Force Actual. Maintain observation posture. Do not engage. Repeat, you are not cleared to engage. Kara stared at the radio like it had just spoken a foreign language. Below her, more shots cracked across the frozen town, more SEALs going down, the ambush spreading like a cancer through Kane's entire element. Actual, they're going to die. Your orders are observation only, Lieutenant. Confirm you understand. The rank in his voice made it an order. The tone made it a threat. Kara had been in the Navy long enough to know the difference between a directive and a career-ending moment. Understood, she said. The word tasted like ash. She released the transmit button and went back to watching. Because that's what she'd been ordered to do. Watch, report, let better people make the decisions. The next 20 minutes destroyed any illusion that this was a conventional ambush. The enemy moved like water. The moment a SEAL element tried to maneuver, fire came from a new direction. The moment they found cover, that cover came under coordinated attack from multiple angles. The moment they tried to consolidate, mortar rounds started dropping with precision that suggested forward observers with direct line of sight to every position. Kara tracked it all through her scope, cataloged it all with the clinical detachment they'd taught her in sniper school, watched her countrymen die with the same professional focus she'd used to spot for artillery, and hated every second of it. 12 casualties in the first 15 minutes, 3 confirmed KIA, the rest wounded, some critically. She watched corpsmen working under fire, watched operators dragging their brothers to cover, watched the textbook tactics of American special operations meet something that had been designed specifically to counter them. The enemy wasn't just good, they were prepared. They'd studied SEAL tactics, anticipated SEAL responses, built a trap that turned American doctrine into American casualties. Someone on that enemy command net knew exactly what they were doing, and they were doing it perfectly. At 06:18 hours, Kara found him. Building 12, 4th floor, northwest corner. Thermal signature larger than the others, either heavier clothing or a bigger man. He moved between windows with an economy of motion that spoke to decades of experience. And every time he keyed his radio, the enemy fire shifted, coordinated, precise. Kara zoomed her scope to maximum magnification, got a visual. Male, early 60s Slavic, features, gray beard, winter combat gear that looked military, but carried no insignia. He stood at the window like he owned the entire town, which tactically speaking he did. She didn't recognize the face, but she recognized the bearing, the confidence. The way he moved like gravity was a suggestion rather than a law. This was a professional, not a terrorist, not an insurgent, a professional soldier. Russian almost certainly. The tactics confirmed it. Soviet doctrine updated for modern warfare. Kara pulled up the enemy dossier in her mind. The intelligence brief had mentioned a possible hostile force in the region. Former Spetsnaz, led by a man the CIA files called the Wolf. Real name Dmitry Volkov. Dropped off the radar in 1994 after the Soviet collapse. Presumed dead. Not dead. Very much alive. And standing 718 meters from her position. She ranged him, confirmed the distance. Calculated wind drift, bullet drop time of flight. The numbers came automatically after years of training. Wind 8 knots from the northeast, temperature -23 Fahrenheit and dropping. Barometric pressure falling. Shooting downhill, which meant less drop than a flat trajectory. Difficult shot, but makeable. She'd qualified at 800 meters in school. Made shots at 750 in training. The conditions were bad but not impossible. 1 bullet. That's all it would take. Kill the commander, watch the organization collapse. Create chaos in the enemy ranks. Give Kane's people a chance to break contact and extract. 1 bullet. 1 dead Russian. The Americans live. The mathematics were simple. The morality was simpler. Kara's finger moved to her trigger. Found the familiar curve. Started taking up the slack with pressure so gradual it felt like thinking about shooting rather than actually doing it. Her radio crackled. Reaper Actual. We are monitoring your thermal signature. Do not engage. Confirm you copy. They were watching her. Satellite surveillance. They could see the thermal bloom from her position. Could probably see the orientation of her rifle. Could definitely see if she fired. Copy, Kara said. Moved her finger off the trigger. Back to the guard. Safe. Good. Maintain observation. Intelligence teams are tracking this network. Your engagement would compromise months of development work. You will observe only. Confirm. Kara watched Volkov coordinate another salvo. Watched 3 more SEALs go down. Watched the body count rise while command told her that shooting the man responsible would compromise development work. Confirmed, she said, because that's what lieutenants said to generals, even when the generals were wrong, even when men were dying, even when every instinct said shoot, damn the consequences. She was 25 years old, 3 years in the Navy, 18 months as a qualified sniper. She'd been in exactly one combat situation before this, and it had ended with a good man dead because she'd hesitated. She wasn't going to make that mistake again. Except command was making the mistake for her, ordering her to watch, ordering her to let it happen, ordering her to prioritize intelligence gathering over American lives. Kara pulled her eye back from the scope, blinked away the moisture that had nothing to do with the cold, put her eye back to the scope and kept watching. Because that's what soldiers did, followed orders, trusted that someone higher up the chain of command had information she didn't. Trusted that the bigger picture made sense even when the small picture looked like murder. By 06:45 hours, the tactical situation had deteriorated from bad to catastrophic. Kane's forces had fragmented into isolated pockets. The enemy's overlapping fields of fire made movement suicidal. Every attempt to consolidate drew immediate accurate fire from multiple positions. Every attempt to break contact ran into another ambush. They were boxed in. Professionally, thoroughly, completely boxed in. Kara listened to the radio traffic. Kane's voice stayed calm, professional, giving orders that couldn't possibly work because the situation had moved beyond tactics and into simple mathematics. His people were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and running out of options. She heard other voices too. Young operators reporting casualties. Corpsmen calling for medical supplies they didn't have. Team leaders trying to maintain cohesion as their units got carved into smaller and smaller pieces. And underneath it all, she heard the fear. The realization dawning across hundreds of men and women that they were in serious trouble. That this wasn't a firefight they could win. That extraction wasn't coming. That the mission brief had been wrong about everything that mattered. At 16:47 hours, the official count came through on the command frequency. Kara had been monitoring it since the shooting started, her security clearance giving her access to channels she technically wasn't supposed to hear. All elements Longbow actual. Confirm roster. 381 personnel committed. Confirm all accounted. The responses came back in sequence. Team leaders sounding off. Everyone was still in the area of operations. No one had extracted. No one had escaped. 381 in, 0 out. Then the weather forecast. Be advised, major storm system approaching. All rotary wing assets grounded. Estimated clearance time 1800 hours tomorrow. Ground QRF is 6 hours out minimum. You are on your own until conditions improve. 18 hours. Kane's people had to survive 18 hours in a kill box against professional opposition in -30-degree weather with limited ammunition and mounting casualties. Kara did the math. At the current casualty rate, 18 hours meant nobody walked out. She keyed her radio. Cypher Reaper. Request permission to engage enemy leadership. I have clear shot on what I believe is enemy commander. Range 718 meters. Conditions are challenging but within parameters. Engagement would likely cause enemy network disruption. The response took 30 seconds. Long enough that she thought maybe they were actually considering it. Long enough that hope flickered. Then negative Reaper. Maintain observation posture. This network has been under development for 6 months. Premature engagement compromises strategic objectives. You will not fire. Confirm. Strategic objectives. She was listening to men die and command was worried about strategic objectives. Reaper, confirm you copy your orders. Kara looked through her scope, found Volkov again. He was coordinating a mortar strike, probably on Kane's position, probably about to kill more Americans in the name of tactical demonstration. At that range, with perfect conditions, she could end him. End this, save lives. Or she could follow orders, trust the system, believe that sacrificing these lives would somehow save more lives later through intelligence gains she wasn't cleared to understand. Confirmed, Kara said. Observation only, Reaper copies. She released the transmit button and settled in to watch more men die. Because that's what the mission required, that's what her orders demanded, that's what cowards did. The thought came unbidden, harsh, true. She pushed it away, concentrated on the scope, on the job, on anything except the growing certainty that she was repeating Syria. The same hesitation, the same failure. The sun had moved barely an inch across the sky, but the town below had transformed into hell. Smoke rose from 3 buildings. Blood stained the snow in patterns that told stories of desperate last stands and failed evacuations. The temperature continued to drop as the storm system approached, dark clouds building on the horizon, like a physical manifestation of what was coming. Minus 31 degrees Fahrenheit now, the kind of cold that killed as efficiently as bullets. Kara flexed her fingers inside her gloves. They were starting to go numb. Frostbite was creeping in despite her preparations. 3 days in this position was pushing the limits of human endurance. The next 18 hours would push far beyond those limits. She wondered if she'd live to see the end of this. Wondered if any of them would. Through her scope, she watched Kane's element pinned in what looked like an old community center. Watched the enemy coordinate fire on that position. Watched the walls chip and crack under sustained assault. She could help. 1 shot. 1 dead commander. 1 chance. But orders were orders. Kara pulled back from her scope and closed her eyes. Just for a moment. Just to rest them. The cold immediately made her regret it. Body heat leaked away the moment she stopped moving. She opened her eyes again, put them back to the scope, and resumed her vigil. That's when she heard Kane's voice on the open channel. Not to his teams, not to command, just out there. To whoever was listening. To God, maybe. Or to history. Longbow, this is Viper 1. We are heavily engaged, no viable extraction routes. Weather deteriorating, casualties mounting. We are... A pause. The sound of nearby gunfire. Then quieter. We're boxed in. We need help. Somebody, anybody. We're dying here. The transmission cut off. Silence filled the radio spectrum. Nobody responded. What could they say? Help wasn't coming. Everyone knew it. Kara stared at her radio, then at her rifle, then through her scope at Volkov, still coordinating, still commanding, still killing with the efficiency of a man who'd done this 100 times before. In her pocket, she felt the weight of a compass. Old, tarnished brass, a gift from Colonel Jacob McLeish at her graduation from sniper school 6 months ago. He'd said it belonged to his father, had carried it through the Gulf War, had kept him honest when everything else was chaos. McLeish had believed in her when her instructors hadn't, when her classmates had whispered that she was a diversity quota, when she'd almost quit after the first month because the physical standards seemed designed to break her. He'd pulled her aside after a particularly brutal day, said something she'd never forgotten. Brennan, you're better than you think. Someday you'll prove it. Probably when no one's watching. That's when it counts. When there's no one there to pat your back or pin a medal on your chest, when it's just you and the choice and the knowledge that you'll have to live with whichever way you go. No one was watching now. Not really. Command was monitoring her thermal signature from a satellite thousands of miles away, but they couldn't see inside her head, couldn't see the choice forming. Kara reached into her pocket and pulled out the compass. The brass was cold enough to burn. She looked at the inscription on the back, worn smooth by decades of handling but still readable true north. She put it back in her pocket, put her eye back to her scope. Found Volkov again. The enemy commander was timing something, checking his watch, gesturing to someone off-screen. Another coordinated strike coming. More Americans about to die. Kara's finger moved to her trigger guard. Not on the trigger. Not yet. Just resting against it, feeling the familiar shape, the promise of action, the possibility of choice. Her radio crackled one more time. Reaper actual, final confirmation. You are not cleared to engage. Any unauthorized fire will result in immediate court-martial and possible criminal charges. Your career will end. Your freedom may end. Do you understand the consequences of disobeying a direct order in combat? Kara kept her eye on the scope, kept her crosshairs on Volkov, kept her breathing steady. I understand, she said. And she did. She understood that command was playing a larger game, that they saw chess pieces where she saw people, that their strategic calculus included acceptable losses and acceptable sacrifices and acceptable betrayals of the people doing the dying. She understood that following orders meant watching Americans die in the name of intelligence gathering. She understood that disobeying orders meant the end of everything she'd worked for, the career she'd built, the respect she'd earned, the future she'd imagined. She understood all of it. The question was what she was going to do about it. The storm arrived ahead of schedule at 15:47 hours. The sky went from gray to black in 20 minutes. Wind picked up from 15 knots to 30, then to 40. Snow began falling in sheets that reduced visibility from 2 kilometers to 200 meters. Kara's hide became a frozen hell. The temperature plummeted. Wind chill pushed it lower. Her thermal blanket could only do so much. The cold got in everywhere, worked through every layer, found every gap in her defenses. She started shivering. Violent, uncontrollable shaking that made keeping a sight picture nearly impossible. She forced herself to breathe through it, forced herself to maintain position, forced herself to keep watching even though watching was becoming a physical impossibility. Below, the SEALs were suffering worse. They had wounded who couldn't move, couldn't generate body heat, couldn't do anything except slowly freeze to death in whatever cover they'd found. The enemy was suffering too, but they had prepared positions. Heaters, rotation schedules. They'd planned for this. The SEALs hadn't. Another tactical advantage for the home team. Through breaks in the snow, Kara caught glimpses of the battle. It had settled into a stalemate. The SEALs couldn't move. The enemy didn't need to. They could just wait. Let the cold do their work for them. Let hypothermia and frostbite and simple exposure reduce the operators to frozen corpses, 18 hours until extraction. Assuming anyone lived that long, Kara checked her own status. Frostbite on 3 fingertips of her left hand. White patches spreading, loss of sensation. Not severe yet, but progressing. She had maybe 6 hours before it became mission critical. Before she lost the fine motor control needed to take a precision shot. 6 hours. Then she'd be useless. Just another casualty in a failed operation. Unless she did something in the next 6 hours, something unauthorized, something that would save lives at the cost of her own career. The choice was clarifying itself, becoming simple, binary. The way all hard choices eventually became when you stripped away the justifications and rationalizations and political considerations. Save them or follow orders. Be the person she'd been in Syria, hesitant, obedient, watching a good man die because she'd waited for permission. Or be someone else, someone who made the hard call, someone who chose right over easy, someone who shot when it mattered even if no one would ever thank her for it. Kara pulled out McLeish's compass again, looked at it through eyes that were starting to blur with cold and exhaustion. True north. The inscription mocked her. There was no true north here, just bad options and worse ones. Except maybe that was the point. True north wasn't the easy direction. It was the right direction, even when right meant hard, even when right meant sacrifice. McLeish had taught her that, had lived it through 2 decades of service, had retired with honor because he'd never compromised on the things that mattered. What mattered now? Following orders or saving lives, Kara put the compass away, made her decision. It was surprisingly easy once she stopped fighting it. Once she accepted what it would cost and decided the cost was worth paying. She just had to wait for the right moment. The window when visibility would clear enough for a shot, when Volkov would be exposed, when one bullet could cascade into tactical victory instead of just one more statistic. That moment was coming. She could feel it the way she felt the cold, the fear, the absolute certainty that she was about to throw away everything she'd built. But the lives waiting below were worth it. She'd failed one man in Syria. She wouldn't fail these, even if it meant becoming the ghost everyone already thought she was. Even if it meant disappearing into the cold and the dark and the consequences. Even if no one would ever know her name. The count came through at 19:23 hours. Kara had been listening to the casualty reports for hours, each one a name, each name a person, each person someone's son or daughter or parent or friend. 13 KIA now, 43 wounded, 368 still fighting. But not for much longer. The cold was winning the battle the bullets had started. Hypothermia was setting in across the entire force. Weapons were jamming, ammunition was running low, and the storm showed no signs of stopping. 18 hours had been an optimistic estimate. Kara revised it downward. 12 hours, maybe 10. Then it would be over. Then command would fly in to count the bodies and write the after-action report and learn all those important lessons about network development and strategic objectives. And families would get flags and medals and condolences that meant nothing, unless someone changed the equation. Kara checked her rifle one more time. The scope was clear. The bore was clean. The ammunition was at body temperature. Everything was ready. Everything except her. She thought about Syria one more time. Sergeant Wade Hutchins, 34 years old. Dead because she'd hesitated 2 seconds. 2 seconds. The time it takes to fail. She'd lived with those 2 seconds for 9 months. Carried them like weight. Let them define her. Let them become the story she told herself about who she was. But stories could change. People could change. Cowards could become brave if they chose to be. And choice was the key word. Not orders. Not protocol, not strategic objectives or intelligence priorities or career considerations. Just choice. The simple human act of deciding what kind of person you wanted to be. Kara made her choice. She reached for her radio, turned it off, removed the battery, set it aside, cut herself off from command, from orders, from the chain of command that had failed the people who needed it most. Now there was just her. Her rifle, her target, and a shot that would change everything or mean nothing depending on whether she had the courage to take it. The storm would clear in approximately 3 hours. Weather patterns were predictable in this region. There would be a window, maybe 15 minutes, maybe less, when visibility extended beyond 200 meters, when she could see Volkov again, when the shot became possible. 3 hours. She could survive 3 hours. She'd survived 3 days already. 3 more hours was nothing. except it was everything. Those 3 hours would determine who she was, what she believed, whether the person she saw in the mirror every morning was someone she could respect or someone she'd have to spend the rest of her life avoiding. Kara settled into her position. Let the cold work through her. Let the pain become background noise. Let everything fall away except the scope and the target and the moment that was coming. They were counting on her. They didn't know it, would never know it, but they were counting on her anyway, the way Hutchins had counted on her in Syria. This time she wouldn't fail. This time she'd be ready. This time when the moment came she would shoot and let the consequences sort themselves out. The 3 hours began at 22:47 hours when the storm hit with full force. Kara had thought she understood cold. 3 days in this position had taught her about discomfort, about the way -30 degrees worked through gear designed to withstand it. But this was different. This was cold with intent, cold with malice, the kind of cold that didn't just threaten, it promised. -31 degrees Fahrenheit, wind gusts reaching 50 miles per hour, snow falling so thick that her scope showed nothing but white static. The world reduced to a 3-foot bubble around her body, and even that was trying to kill her. She pulled the thermal blanket tighter. It helped. Not enough. Never enough. Her body was burning calories to generate heat, and she'd been rationing her supplies for 3 days. The nutrient bars in her pack were frozen solid. The water in her canteen had turned to slush despite the insulation. She forced herself to eat anyway, chewing the bars until her jaw ached, drinking the slush and feeling it freeze her throat on the way down. Pain was information. McLeish had taught her that. Pain told you what was wrong so you could fix it or endure it or accept that fixing wasn't possible and endurance was all you had left. Right now, pain was telling her that her body was shutting down, core temperature dropping, extremities going numb, frostbite spreading from 3 fingertips to 5, from white patches to gray. The shivering had progressed from uncomfortable to violent to the kind of full-body shaking that made aiming impossible. She forced herself through exercises, flexing her hands inside the gloves, rolling her shoulders, tensing and releasing muscle groups to generate heat and maintain blood flow. Every movement was agony. Every movement was necessary. Below, the seals were dying faster now. She couldn't see them through the storm, but she could hear the radio traffic when the wind allowed. Desperate voices reporting casualties, corpsmen working miracles with inadequate supplies, team leaders trying to maintain morale as their people froze. The count had dropped to 368, then 366, then 364. Each number represented a human being who'd woken up that morning expecting to live through the day. Each number was someone who'd trusted the mission brief, trusted command, trusted that the system would take care of them. Each number was a failure, and Kara was complicit in it as long as she sat here watching. She checked her chronometer. 23:19 hours. 2 hours and 40 minutes until the window. 2 hours and 40 minutes of holding together. Of not giving in to the hypothermia that was whispering sweet promises about sleep and rest and how easy it would be to just close her eyes for a moment. Kara bit the inside of her cheek hard. The pain brought clarity. She tasted blood, kept biting until the urge to sleep passed. 2 hours and 39 minutes. She could do this. She had to do this. At 00:47 hours, Kara's mind started playing tricks. Hypothermia stage 2. She recognized the symptoms from her cold weather training. The confusion, the mental fog, the way thoughts came slower, less clearly, like trying to think through honey. She fought it with every technique she knew, counting backwards from 1,000 by sevens, reciting the ballistic tables for her rifle, running through her patrol order checklist. Anything to keep her mind sharp, anything to maintain the cognitive function she'd need to take the shot. 1,000, 993, 986, 979, each number a small victory, each number proof she was still functional, still capable, still dangerous. Through breaks in the storm, she caught glimpses of the battle. The enemy had adapted to the weather, rotating their teams on shorter intervals now, 30 minutes instead of 40, keeping their people fresh and warm while the SEALs had no rotation, no relief, no respite. Professional work. Volkov knew what he was doing, knew that time and weather were better weapons than bullets, knew that patience would deliver victory more surely than aggression. Kara hated him for it, hated his competence, hated that he was right, hated that she could recognize the tactical genius even as she watched it kill her countrymen. But hate was warm. Hate was fuel. She fed it, stoked it, let it burn through the fog and the cold and the growing certainty that she might not survive the night regardless of what she did or didn't do. Her radio, the one she'd turned off and set aside, suddenly crackled to life. Kara stared at it. She'd removed the battery. It shouldn't be functioning. But there it was, spitting static and voices like a ghost transmitting from beyond. Then she realized. The battery was still warm from her body heat, still had enough charge for one last transmission, and someone was using the emergency override frequency, the one that bypassed normal protocols, the one reserved for imminent threat to life. She picked up the radio, held it to her ear, listened. It was Kane. His voice came through layers of interference and distance, professional still, controlled. But underneath she could hear the desperation, the knowledge that he was out of options and out of time. Longbow Viper 1, final status report, 364 personnel operational, 51 wounded, 17 critical, 13 KIA bodies recovered, temperature -31 and falling, ammunition at 40%, medical supplies exhausted. Estimate we have 6 hours maximum before hypothermia casualties become catastrophic. Requesting. A pause, long enough that Kara thought the transmission had cut out. Then quieter. Requesting you tell our families we fought well. Tell them we didn't quit. Tell them. Static swallowed the rest. Kara set the radio down. Her hands were shaking. Not from cold this time. From rage. From the injustice of listening to a good man prepare to die because the people who were supposed to support him had decided his death served a greater purpose. Strategic objectives. Intelligence priorities. Acceptable losses. The phrases tasted like poison. She looked at her rifle, then threw her scope at nothing but white. The storm was still too thick. The shot wasn't possible yet, but it would be. Soon. The weather patterns in this region were predictable. The storm would abate around 01:30 hours. She'd have 15 minutes, maybe 20 before it closed in again. One window, one chance, one shot, if she was still capable of taking it. Kara flexed her fingers. 3 of them didn't respond properly. The frostbite had progressed beyond superficial tissue damage. She was losing fine motor control in her left hand. Her trigger hand was still functional. Barely. But for how long she made a decision. Pulled out a chemical hand warmer from her emergency supplies. Broke the seal. Felt it start generating heat. Placed it inside her left glove. The warmth was immediate and agonizing. Like needles driving into dead flesh. Like fire on frozen skin. She bit back a scream and rode out the pain until sensation returned. Painful sensation. But sensation. That was good. That meant the tissue was still viable, still salvageable, still capable of steadying a rifle and making a shot that mattered. The memory came unbidden. Syria, 9 months ago. A different roof in a different country in a different war that somehow felt exactly the same. Sergeant Wade Hutchins had been her spotter that day. 34 years old, father of 3 daughters ages 8, 6, and 3. He'd shown Kara pictures during the infiltration. Talked about how his oldest wanted to be a Marine like him. How his youngest still didn't quite understand why Daddy had to go away. How his wife was holding the family together with a strength that made his own courage look like nothing. They'd been providing overwatch for a patrol moving through a contested neighborhood. Routine mission, low threat assessment. The kind of assignment you gave to junior snipers to build confidence and trigger time. Then the ISIS fighter had appeared in a window 400 meters away, RPG on his shoulder, aimed at the patrol below. Clear threat, clear shot, clear. Textbook engagement. Hutchins had called it. I have shot. Confirm hostile. Kara had seen him, had her crosshairs centered, had her breathing controlled, had everything lined up perfectly, and hesitated. 2 seconds, maybe 3. Long enough to think, what if he's not hostile? What if it's a civilian who just looks like he's carrying a weapon? What if I'm wrong, long enough for the fighter to fire first? The RPG had missed the patrol, hit a wall instead. But Hutchins had been tracking the launch, and the backblast had given away the fighter's exact position, and Hutchins had leaned forward to get a better angle, and that's when the second fighter, the one Kara hadn't seen, the one covering his partner, had fired. Hutchins had taken the round in his neck. Arterial hit. He'd bled out in 90 seconds despite everything Kara had done. Despite the pressure she'd applied and the prayers she'd screamed and the promises she'd made that if he just held on, just kept breathing, just gave her another minute, she'd get him help. His last words had been, shoot, damn it, just shoot. Then he'd died in her arms while she radioed for a medevac that arrived 10 minutes too late. The inquiry had cleared her. Protocol said, confirm hostile before engagement. She'd followed protocol. The fact that confirming had taken 3 seconds instead of 1 wasn't a violation. It was caution, prudence, good decision-making under pressure. Everyone said so. Her commander, the investigating officer, even Hutchins's widow, who'd somehow found the grace to write Kara a letter saying she didn't blame her, that war was chaos and people died, and there was no fault in following the rules. But Kara knew the truth. Following the rules had killed Hutchins as surely as the bullet that tore through his neck. Her hesitation, her need for certainty, her cowardice dressed up as caution. She'd carried that knowledge for 9 months. Let it define her. Let it become the story of who she was. The sniper who froze, the operator who couldn't pull the trigger when it mattered, the lieutenant who valued her career over her teammate's life. And now here she was again. Same choice, different battlefield, hundreds of lives instead of 1. But the same essential question, would she shoot or would she hesitate? Would she be the person who saved them or the person who watched them die? The answer was forming, had been forming since Kane's final transmission. Since she'd turned off her radio and cut herself loose from command, since she'd made peace with the consequences and accepted that some choices were worth making, even when they destroyed you. She wouldn't hesitate this time. Whatever else happened, whatever price she paid, she wouldn't carry another Hutchins for the rest of her life. At 1:30 hours, the storm broke, not completely. The wind was still gusting at 30 miles per hour. Snow was still falling, but the wall of white that had reduced visibility to nothing thinned, became translucent, became something she could see through if she was patient and lucky and willing to wait for the gaps. Kara moved to her rifle, her hands barely cooperated. The chemical warmer had saved her fingers from complete frostbite, but they were still stiff. Still slow. Still unreliable in ways that made precision shooting a gamble rather than a certainty. She didn't care. This was the window. This was the chance. If she waited for perfect conditions, people would die while she pursued perfection. Better to take an imperfect shot than no shot at all. She settled into position. The rifle felt different than it had 3 hours ago, heavier, awkward, like she was handling someone else's weapon. Her body was shutting down, hypothermia stealing fine motor control, frostbite stealing sensation, exhaustion stealing everything else. But she still had enough. She had to have enough. Through her scope, she glassed Building 12. Fourth floor, northwest corner, where she'd last seen Volkov 7 hours ago. The storm made thermal imaging useless. She was relying on ambient light and patience and the hope that professional soldiers were creatures of habit. She waited, breathing slowly, counting heartbeats, letting each moment stretch into the next without tension or anticipation. Just presence, just awareness, just the scope and the building and the growing certainty that he'd appear. At 0138 hours, Volkov stepped into the window. Kara's world narrowed to the reticle. She saw him clearly despite the conditions, saw him raise binoculars, saw him key his radio, saw him coordinate his forces with the same casual competence he'd shown all day. She ranged him. The distance was exactly where she'd calculated. The distance hadn't changed, only her certainty. Wind was 8 knots from the northeast, down from 50 but still significant. She calculated drift. 19 inches right, her scope's ballistic computer confirmed. She dialed in the correction. Cold, dense air meant more resistance, more drop. She calculated. 11.8 feet, dialed it in. Time of flight at this range with current conditions 1.4 seconds. She knew this number the way she knew her own heartbeat. Had run the calculation so many times it was instinct rather than math. The gap between deciding and knowing. Between shooting and confirming, between faith and certainty. Her finger found the trigger, took up the slack, found the wall where pressure became commitment, where thinking became doing, where lieutenant became something else entirely. She began her breathing cycle. 4 seconds in, 2 seconds hold, 6 seconds out, 2 seconds hold, repeat, each cycle dropping her heart rate, each cycle bringing calm. Each cycle preparing her body for the recoil that was coming. She thought of Hutchins, saw his face, remembered his last words. Let them become permission. Let them become absolution. Let them become the reason she was here and the reason she'd take the shot and the reason she'd accept whatever came after. 4 seconds in, 2 hold, 6 out, 2 hold, her heart rate dropped below 60. 58 beats per minute. The zone where noise disappeared and the world became simple. Crosshairs, target, trigger. She watched Volkov through the reticle, watched him coordinate his forces, watched him kill her countrymen with efficiency and professionalism and complete confidence that no one could touch him. He was wrong about that last part. 4 seconds in, 2 hold, 6 out, 2 hold. At 0139 hours and 55 seconds, Kara's finger completed its journey. The trigger broke with the clean surprise of perfect technique. The rifle spoke with authority muted by the suppressor into something that sounded like ice cracking. The recoil came and went and she wrote it and brought the scope back to target for immediate follow-up assessment. The bullet left the barrel at 2,750 feet per second. It spun right with the rifling. It dropped with gravity. It drifted with wind. It flew through air so cold that physics became slightly different than the tables predicted, and for 1.4 seconds the entire world held its breath. Kara didn't watch the bullet's flight. Couldn't. At this distance, the projectile was invisible. She kept her crosshairs on target, kept her breathing steady, kept her finger ready for a second shot if the first missed. But she knew. The way a shooter knows when they've made a perfect trigger press, the way years of training create a sense beyond sight, the way muscle memory and practice and 10,000 repetitions produce certainty without evidence. The shot was good. Time became elastic, subjective. Kara existed in a space between action and consequence where everything was possible and nothing was certain, where she'd either saved lives or revealed her position for nothing, where she'd either proven herself or proven everyone right who'd ever doubted her. Then Volkov's head snapped back. The binoculars fell from his hands. His body collapsed out of frame with the precise mechanics of instant incapacitation. No dramatic spin, no Hollywood death. Just a man who was alive and then wasn't. Just a threat that existed and then stopped. Through a blizzard, after 3 days of cold exposure. With frost-bitten fingers and hypothermia setting in and every reason to miss except the one that mattered, she didn't. The shot was perfect. Kara's training took over, immediate damage assessment. She watched the window, watched for secondary targets, watched for confirmation that what she'd seen was real and not hypothermia-induced hallucination. At 28 seconds, a figure entered the room where Volkov had fallen. Saw something. Began gesturing frantically. Emergency. Panic. Confusion. At 1 minute 15 seconds, radio traffic erupted across enemy frequencies. She could hear it on her scanner. Russian voices speaking urgently. The words didn't matter. The tone said everything. Leadership down. Commander killed. Organization fracturing. At 2 minutes, the enemy sniper positions began changing their behavior. The coordinated fire that had pinned the SEALs all day became sporadic. Uncoordinated. The teams were no longer receiving clear direction. The network was collapsing in real time. The mathematics had worked. One shot, one cascade, one tactical situation completely reversed. Kara reached for her radio, the one she'd turned off 7 hours ago. The one that represented her last bridge to command and career and everything she was about to burn. She turned it on, keyed the transmit, spoke on the frequency she knew Kane would be monitoring. All Viper elements unknown call sign. Enemy leadership neutralized. Northwest corridor opening. Exploitation window approximately 15 minutes. Recommend immediate action. This is not an authorized transmission. Act or die. She released the transmit, waited, wondered if they'd listen, wondered if they'd recognize the opportunity or dismiss it as enemy deception, wondered if she'd just thrown away her entire life for a gesture that wouldn't matter. Then Kane's voice came through, professional, controlled, decisive. All Viper elements, Viper 1. You heard the transmission. Northwest corridor on my mark. Wounded in support to center. Security elements covering. We move together or we die together. 3, 2, 1 mark. They moved. Kara watched through her scope as the Navy SEALs executed a coordinated breakout. Watched them exploit the chaos she'd created. Watched them move through gaps that hadn't existed 5 minutes ago. Watched them carry their wounded and cover their teams and fight their way toward survival with the kind of desperate courage that made her throat tight. And she helped them. For 12 minutes, Kara became their guardian angel, the ghost they didn't know, the sniper providing overwatch without authorization or recognition or the slightest expectation of thanks. Hostile sniper building 7, 3rd floor, 2 shooters. She transmitted coordinates. Kane's element directed suppressive fire. The threat neutralized. Mortar crew grid 4-7 personnel times 4. More coordinates. More fire. Another threat eliminated. Clear to grid 39 air assets inbound ETA 6 minutes. Information that meant hope. That meant extraction. That meant survival. Volkov's second in command tried to rally the forces. Took position in a window to coordinate. Tried to reassert control over the fracturing network. Kara found him at 695 meters. Tracked him as he moved. Led the target, took the shot. Her second kill of the day, clean, professional, necessary. The enemy network shattered completely. 62 shooters who'd operated as a cohesive unit became 62 individuals trying to survive. Some fled, some went to ground, some kept fighting but without coordination, without purpose. Without the leadership that had made them dangerous. The mathematics proved correct again. Kill the head, watch the body die. At 01:57 hours, the first helicopter appeared through the storm, then another, then 6 more. Extraction assets that had been grounded by weather found just enough clearing to operate, found just enough window to save lives that should have been lost. Kara watched the SEALs consolidate at the extraction point. Watched them load wounded first. Watched them move with the efficiency of professionals who'd just survived the impossible. Watched them board the helicopters and lift off into the storm and disappear towards safety. She counted them, 13 left behind to be recovered later with proper ceremony and respect. But the rest going home. Families who'd get phone calls instead of flag-draped coffins. Futures that wouldn't end in a frozen town nobody remembered. The price had been worth it. Kane's voice came through her radio one final time. Unknown call sign Viper 1. I don't know who you are. I don't know why you helped, but we owe you everything. If you're out there, if you can hear this, know that we'll remember, we'll find you, and when we do, the debt will be paid. Kara smiled. First time in 3 days. It felt strange, foreign, like her face had forgotten how. She keyed her transmit one last time. Reaper, that's all you need to know. Tell Sergeant Hutchins's daughters their father's death meant something. Tell them a coward learned courage. Tell them... She stopped, couldn't finish. The words were there, but the emotion was too much, and she was so tired and so cold and so far past her limits that speaking felt like lifting mountains. Tell them I'm sorry I was too late for him. But I wasn't too late for you. Reaper out. She turned off the radio, removed the battery, threw both pieces as far as her frozen arm could manage. They disappeared into the snow, evidence destroyed. Trail erased. Now came the hard part. Survival, extraction, facing consequences. Kara began breaking down her position. Packing equipment with hands that barely functioned. Every movement was agony. Every task took 3 times longer than it should. But she completed it, because that's what professionals did. They finished the mission even when the mission was over. She descended the 6 floors on legs that felt like wood, made it to street level, made it to her cached snowmobile 5 kilometers away. The vehicle started on the 3rd try. The engine sounded like salvation. She drove south, away from the town, away from the battlefield, away from the evidence and the witnesses and the life she'd just ended to save others. The storm swallowed her tracks within minutes. By the time anyone thought to look, there'd be nothing to find. Just another ghost story. Just another legend. Just another mystery that the military would classify and bury and pretend never happened. 36 hours later, Kara Brennan walked into Forward Operating Base Kodiak and turned herself in to the military police waiting at the gate. They arrested her without ceremony. Read her rights. Escorted her to a holding cell that was warm and dry and felt like luxury after 3 days in a frozen hide. The JAG investigation began within hours. They questioned her for 12 hours straight, wanted every detail, every decision. Every moment between infiltration and extraction. She told them everything, held nothing back. What was the point of lying? They had satellite footage, had radio intercepts, had witnesses who could describe exactly what had happened even if they didn't know who'd done it. She'd violated direct orders, engaged without authorization, compromised an intelligence operation, revealed her position and her capabilities and potentially exposed classified methods and equipment. By every standard of military justice, she was guilty. By every standard that actually mattered, she'd saved lives. The trial that wasn't came on the 3rd day. They brought her to a conference room, made her wait. Then the JAG officer entered a colonel she'd never met with an expression that revealed nothing. Lieutenant Brennan, you understand the charges against you? Yes, sir. You understand that you violated direct orders from a general officer during combat operations? Yes, sir. You understand that such violations typically result in court-martial dishonorable discharge and potential criminal prosecution? Yes, sir. The colonel studied her, silent, evaluating. Then he did something unexpected. He smiled. Lieutenant, you were never in Alaska. You were on a training exercise in Nevada, 2 weeks of cold weather qualifications. You fired approximately 2,000 practice rounds, all documented, all verified, all completely routine. Kara stared at him. Sir, I don't understand. You're not meant to. What you are meant to do is accept this explanation, return to duty, and never speak of this operation again to anyone for any reason, ever. The general who ordered me not to engage has been informed that your intervention resulted in the capture of Volkov's handler during the extraction chaos. The intelligence gained from that capture has been, and I quote, extraordinarily valuable, more valuable than months of network observation would have provided. Turns out your tactical judgment was better than the strategic assessment. Congratulations. Kara felt the room tilt. So I'm not being charged. There are no charges because there was no operation. You were in Nevada, remember? And the SEALs who know someone saved them. The colonel's smile faded. They know someone helped. They don't know who. They don't need to know. What they need is to go home to their families and process what happened and eventually return to duty. What you need is to do the same. This conversation never happened. This operation never happened. You were in Nevada. Are we clear? Crystal, sir. Good. You're released from custody. Return to your unit. And Lieutenant, whatever happened in Nevada, whatever training you did, it was apparently very effective. Your next performance review will reflect that. Dismissed. Kara stood, saluted, walked out of the room in a daze that had nothing to do with the lingering hypothermia. They'd buried it, classified it, turned her into a ghost officially instead of just metaphorically. She'd saved lives, and the reward was silence, anonymity, the certain knowledge that no one would ever know what she'd done. And somehow that felt exactly right. She didn't need medals, didn't need recognition, didn't need her name in the history books. She needed to know that Hutchins's death had taught her something, that Syria had meaning, that when the moment came again she hadn't hesitated. The survivors were proof enough. 6 months passed like water through fingers. Kara Brennan returned to her unit at Naval Special Warfare Development Group with a service record that showed 2 weeks in Nevada, and nothing else worth mentioning. Her fingers had healed mostly. 3 fingertips on her left hand carried permanent nerve damage. Sensation was reduced, fine motor control compromised. She'd never regain full function. The Navy Medical Board had reviewed her case, declared her fit for duty with limitations. No more Arctic operations, no more extended cold weather exposure. But she could still shoot, could still teach, could still serve in the capacity that mattered most to her now. She requested instructor duty. They gave it to her without question. Lieutenant Brennan, cold weather and marksmanship specialist assigned to basic sniper course at Marine Corps Base Quantico. Teaching the next generation, passing on knowledge that had been purchased with frostbite and fear and the absolute certainty that some lessons could only be learned by living them. Her students didn't know, couldn't know. They saw a young lieutenant with scarred fingers and a quiet intensity. They saw someone competent but not exceptional, professional but not legendary. They had no idea that the woman correcting their breathing techniques had made a shot that had saved more lives than most operators saved in entire careers. That was fine, better than fine. Kara had learned that the best warriors were the ones nobody talked about. The ones who did the work without needing the recognition. The ones who measured success in lives saved rather than medals earned. She lived quietly, off-base apartment in a town that catered to transient military personnel, no close relationships, no complicated entanglements. She'd tried dating once after Alaska. The man had been nice, understanding, patient with her silences and her nightmares and the way she'd wake up at 0300 sweating despite how cold she kept her apartment. But it hadn't worked. How could it? She couldn't tell him what she'd done, couldn't explain why certain sounds made her flinch, or why she avoided watching weather reports, or why she'd sometimes spend entire evenings staring at a compass that had belonged to someone else. So she'd ended it, gently, returned to the solitude that felt safer than vulnerability, returned to the life of a ghost who was trying very hard to be human again. The students helped. Teaching forced her to engage with the present rather than dwelling in the past. Forced her to translate experience into instruction. Forced her to remember that the point of everything she'd been through was to make sure the next generation didn't have to learn the same lessons the same way. She was good at it. The students responded to her quiet competence, to the way she demonstrated techniques rather than just describing them, to the way she could diagnose shooting problems with a glance and correct them with a word. And once, just once, a student had asked her about the scars on her fingers. "Training accident," she'd said. The lie came easily now. "Nevada, cold weather qualifications, learned a valuable lesson about equipment maintenance." The student had nodded, accepted the explanation, moved on to the next question, never knowing that the scars represented the price paid for lives saved, that Nevada was code for something that had never happened but had changed everything. That was 6 months ago. Now it was late June. The Virginia heat was oppressive after months of remembering cold. Kara stood on the rifle range watching her current class of 40 students, 38 men and 2 women, work through their qualification course. One of the women was struggling. Private First Class Rachel Morgan. 22 years old, top physical marks, excellent tactical scores. But something was wrong with her shooting. She'd failed the 700-meter qualification twice. One more failure and she'd wash out. Kara had seen this before. The student had the skills, had the knowledge, but lacked the confidence, was overthinking instead of trusting training, was hesitating that crucial half-second that turned good shots into misses. She walked down the line to Morgan's position, waited until the string of fire ended, then knelt beside her. "What's wrong?" Kara asked. "I don't know, ma'am. The holds look good, the wind calls are right, but I keep pulling left." "You're not pulling left. You're anticipating recoil. Your body knows the shot is coming and it's tensing before the trigger breaks." "How do I fix it?" Kara considered. This was the moment, the teaching point that could make or break a student. She could give Morgan the technical answer, could describe trigger control and follow through and all the mechanical aspects of shooting. Or she could tell the truth. "You don't trust yourself," Kara said. "You're waiting for permission from your brain to take the shot, but by the time your brain gives permission, the moment has passed. You have to decide before you know. You have to trust the training and the preparation and accept that sometimes you shoot before you're certain." Morgan looked at her, really looked at her, seeing something that hadn't been visible before. "That sounds like you're talking about more than marksmanship, ma'am." Kara smiled. "Maybe I am. Try it again. Next target. Don't think. Just breathe and squeeze and let the shot surprise you." Morgan turned back to her rifle, settled into position. Kara watched her breathing pattern change, watched the tension leave her shoulders, watched the transformation from student who was trying to shooter who was doing. The shot broke clean, 700 meters, center mass perfect. Morgan looked back at Kara with an expression of pure surprise. "How did you know that would work?" "Because someone taught me the same lesson. Now teach it to someone else when your time comes." Kara stood and walked back to the observation tower. Behind her, Morgan continued shooting, each round better than the last, each shot building confidence that would serve her in ways she couldn't imagine yet. This was the work now. Not pulling triggers, preparing others to pull triggers, making sure they had the skills and the knowledge and the moral framework to make the right decisions when the impossible moments came. It wasn't glorious, wasn't dramatic, wasn't the kind of thing that made headlines or earned commendations. But it mattered. Every student who graduated mattered. Every operator who made it home because they'd learned from someone who'd been there mattered. Hutchins had mattered. Alaska had mattered. The people she'd saved mattered. And teaching the next generation to be better than she'd been. That mattered most of all. The message arrived on a Thursday evening in early July. Kara had just returned to her apartment from a late session on the range. Hot shower, cold beer. The routine that marked the end of every workday. She was halfway through both when her phone buzzed with an encrypted message notification. She stared at it. Nobody sent her encrypted messages. Her security clearance was standard. Her position was routine. There was no reason for anyone to contact her through channels that required that level of protection. She opened it anyway, read the single line, "The old man wants to see you, this weekend if possible. He says it's time." No signature, no explanation, just a set of coordinates in Montana and a phone number to confirm. Kara knew who it was, knew without question. Colonel Jacob McLeish, her mentor, the man whose compass she still carried, the man who'd believed in her when she'd been just another struggling student who couldn't decide if she belonged. She hadn't seen him since graduation, hadn't spoken to him since a brief phone call 2 weeks after Alaska, where she'd said she was fine and he'd said he was proud of her and they'd both pretended they were talking about Nevada. But McLeish wasn't stupid, and he wasn't someone who missed details. He'd seen the news about a SEAL team extracting from Alaska after a training accident. He'd seen the classified briefings that mentioned weather conditions and equipment failures and all the carefully worded lies that covered up what had really happened. He knew, couldn't prove it, but knew, and now he wanted to see her. Kara sent back a single word, confirmed. 2 days later, she was driving through Montana backcountry on roads that barely qualified as roads. The coordinates led to a ranch 40 miles from the nearest town. The kind of place people went when they wanted to be left alone, when they'd seen enough of the world and decided silence was better than noise. The house was small, well-maintained, surrounded by mountains that made the Virginia ranges look like anthills. She could see why McLeish had chosen it, the isolation, the peace, the sense that this was a place where the past couldn't reach even if it wanted to. She parked her truck and climbed out. The front door opened before she reached it. McLeish stood in the doorway, 73 years old now, gray hair thinner than she remembered, moving a little slower. But the eyes were the same, sharp, evaluating, missing nothing. "Brennan," he said, no rank, no formality, just her name. "Colonel." "It's just Jacob now. I'm retired, remember?" "Yes, sir." He smiled at that, stepped aside. "Come in. I made coffee, real coffee, not that Navy garbage you've been drinking." She followed him inside. The house was exactly what she'd expected. Sparse furniture, clean lines, military precision disguised as civilian living. Photos on the walls showing a career's worth of memories. Men in uniform, ceremonies, battlefields that had been captured by official photographers and then carefully framed. She noticed one photo that was newer than the others. Showed McLeish with a young woman and 2 small children. His daughter's family, she guessed. The reason he'd retired, the legacy he'd chosen over continuing to serve. "That's Emma and her kids," McLeish said, noticing her attention. 7 and 5. "They think Grandpa used to fly helicopters because that's easier to explain than what I actually did. Good kids. The best. They're the reason I finally understood that some battles aren't worth fighting. That legacy isn't about how long you serve. It's about what you leave behind for people who'll never know your name." He poured coffee, handed her a mug, gestured to the kitchen table. They sat across from each other like they'd done a dozen times at Quantico. Teacher and student, mentor and protege. 2 people who understood things civilians never could. "You look good, Brennan. Healthier than graduation, like you figured some things out." "I've been teaching. It suits me." "I heard. Your students speak highly of you. I still have friends in the pipeline. They tell me you're one of the best instructors they've seen in years." Kara shrugged. "I'm just passing on what I learned. That's what good instructors do." He sipped his coffee, studied her over the rim. "How are the hands?" She looked down at her left hand. The scars were visible. 3 fingertips that didn't quite move right. Permanent evidence of something that had never officially happened. They work well enough. Nevada must have been brutal training. There it was, the opening. The acknowledgement that they both knew Nevada was a lie but were going to maintain the fiction anyway. "It taught me things I needed to know." "I'm sure it did." McLeish set down his coffee. "Brennan, I'm going to tell you something, and then we're never going to discuss it again. Understood?" "Yes, sir." "I know what you did. Can't prove it. Won't try to, but I know. I've been reading reports for 40 years. I know what operations look like when they're real and what they look like when they're covers. I know what frostbite patterns look like. I know what that kind of shot requires, and I know that there was exactly one sniper-qualified female lieutenant in theater during the window when something that didn't happen saved lives." Kara said nothing, waited. "I also know what it costs to make that kind of decision, to violate orders, to choose conscience over career, to live with the knowledge that you're right but can never prove it because proving it would destroy you." He reached into his pocket, pulled out a small box, slid it across the table. "My father gave this to me in 1991 before Desert Storm. I carried it through 2 decades of operations. Gave it to you at graduation because I knew you'd need it someday. Now I'm asking for it back, not because you don't deserve it, but because you've earned something better." Kara opened the box. Inside was the compass she'd been carrying for 6 months. The one that had kept her honest in Alaska when everything else was chaos. And next to it was something else. A medal. Bronze star with Valor device. Old, worn, obviously carried for years before being carefully preserved. "That's mine," McLeish said. "From Somalia in '93. I got it for holding a position against overwhelming odds while 37 operators extracted. I almost didn't take the shot that mattered because Command told me not to engage. Then I realized Command wasn't there. I was. And the choice was mine." "Sir, I can't." "You can. You did the same thing I did, made the same choice, paid the same price. The only difference is I got a medal and you got silence. So take mine, not because it makes us even, but because you should know that someone understands. Someone knows what you sacrificed. Someone thinks you're exactly the kind of operator this country needs." Kara picked up the medal. It was heavier than she expected. Not the physical weight, the weight of what it represented. Recognition from the one person whose opinion mattered more than all the official commendations in the world. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was rough. She cleared her throat. "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything, just keep teaching. Keep preparing the next generation. Keep being the person who makes hard choices when no one's watching. That's all the thanks I need." They sat in silence for a while, drinking coffee, watching afternoon light move across the mountains, 2 warriors who'd made similar choices decades apart. 2 people who understood that some prices were worth paying, even when nobody else would ever know. Finally, McLeish spoke again. "There's something else you should know. Commander Kane has been asking questions, quietly, carefully. He's trying to identify his guardian angel, trying to find the operator who saved his people." Kara's stomach tightened. "Has he?" "No, and he won't. I've been steering him wrong, suggesting it was a CIA asset or a foreign ally or a classified program he doesn't have clearance for. He'll keep looking, but he won't find you. I'll make sure of it." "Why?" "Because you deserve anonymity, because heroes who need recognition aren't heroes, they're celebrities, and because the moment Kane identifies you, the silence ends, the investigation starts, the questions begin, and everything you did becomes political instead of purity." He was right. Kara knew he was right, but part of her had wanted Kane to know, had wanted them to understand that someone had cared enough to risk everything. They deserve to know someone fought for them. They do know. They just don't know who. And that's perfect. That's exactly how it should be. They'll carry your gift forward. They'll remember that someone appeared when they needed it most. They'll pay that forward to the next generation. Your legacy isn't your name. It's their lives. Everything they do, everyone they save, every choice they make because they're alive to make it. That's your monument, Brennan. That's your medal. 2 years later, Kara was promoted to lieutenant commander and assigned as senior sniper instructor at Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado. The position came with responsibility and recognition, and the kind of respect that had nothing to do with what had happened in Alaska and everything to do with what she'd accomplished since. Her reputation had grown quietly. Students who'd learned from her at Quantico were now operating in teams around the world. They spoke highly of her methods, of her patience, of the way she could diagnose problems and correct them with economy and precision. Several of those students had saved lives using techniques she'd taught. Several had made difficult shots under pressure. Several had faced impossible choices and made them correctly because someone had prepared them to handle moments when training met reality. That was her legacy now, not one shot, not the people she'd saved, but hundreds of operators who were better prepared, thousands of future decisions that would be made correctly because she'd invested time and knowledge and experience into people who'd carry it forward. She lived less quietly now, had friends among the instructor cadre, went to the occasional social function, even dated someone seriously enough that she'd introduced him to her small circle. He was civilian, a contractor who worked with the Navy on technical projects. Smart, patient, uninterested in hearing war stories because he understood some things weren't meant to be shared. It was working, slowly. She was learning to be human again, learning that ghosts could come back from the cold if they were willing to do the work, learning that redemption wasn't a single moment. It was a series of choices made over time that eventually added up to something worth being. She still carried McLeish's compass, still kept his bronze star in a locked drawer, still thought about Alaska on cold nights when sleep wouldn't come. But those thoughts were less frequent now, less painful, more like memories than open wounds. She'd moved forward. That's what survivors did. The reunion happened by accident in year 3. Kara was at a conference in San Diego, professional development, the kind of mandatory training that kept instructors current on doctrine and methodology. She was between sessions getting coffee in the hotel lobby when she heard a voice behind her. "Excuse me, you're Lieutenant Commander Brennan, right?" She turned, found herself facing a man in his early 40s, commander rank insignia, seal trident, something familiar about his face that she couldn't quite place. "That's right. Do we know each other?" "Not exactly, but I've been hoping to meet you for 3 years. I'm Marcus Kane." The coffee cup nearly slipped from her hands. She recovered, kept her expression neutral through years of practice maintaining operational security under pressure. "Commander Kane, your reputation precedes you. It's an honor." "The honor is mine, ma'am. I've heard excellent things about your instruction program. Several operators from your classes have cycled through my teams. They speak very highly of your methods." "I'm glad to hear it." They stood in awkward silence for a moment. Kane was studying her with an intensity that suggested he was looking for something, trying to match her face against a memory, against a possibility. "Ma'am, can I ask you a question completely off the record, just between operators?" Kara's heart rate increased. Training kept it from showing. "Of course. 3 years ago, there was an operation that officially never happened. But those of us who were there remember it very clearly. We remember that someone saved us, someone with exceptional skills and courage beyond anything I've ever witnessed." The Navy says it was a training accident, says I'm remembering wrong, but I'm not. Commander, I'm not sure what you're asking. I'm asking if you were in Nevada 3 years ago, in January, for cold weather training. The question hung between them, a trap or an opportunity, a chance to be recognized or another moment to maintain the silence that had protected her. Kara looked at Kane, really looked at him, saw the weight he was carrying, the survivor's guilt that came from living when others had died, the need to understand how people had walked away from something that should have killed them all. She understood that weight, carried her own version, knew what it meant to need answers even when answers were dangerous. Yes, Commander, I was in Nevada, 2 weeks of cold weather qualifications, fired approximately 2,000 training rounds, all documented, all verified. It was very effective training. I learned valuable lessons about equipment maintenance and operational parameters. Something flickered in Kane's eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or recognition that the official story was all he'd ever get. I see. The Nevada training must have been remarkably realistic. It was designed to simulate worst-case conditions, very immersive, the kind of training that prepares you for situations you hope never to encounter. And if you did encounter those situations after such realistic training, then I suppose the training would prove its value, would prepare you to make difficult decisions under pressure, would ensure you didn't hesitate when hesitation meant lives lost. Kane held her gaze. Understanding passed between them without words, an acknowledgement that couldn't be spoken but was somehow louder than speech. Thank you, ma'am, for everything you've taught your students, for the time you invest, for making sure the next generation is prepared for moments that matter. Just doing my job, Commander. Some people do their jobs, others do what's necessary regardless of cost. There's a difference, and the difference saves lives. He extended his hand. She shook it. His grip was firm, respectful. The handshake lasted a moment longer than protocol required, long enough to communicate what words couldn't. Then he was gone, walking away toward the conference room. Leaving Kara standing in the lobby with a coffee she'd forgotten was in her hand, and a certainty that Kane knew, couldn't prove it, would never speak it, but knew, and somehow that was enough, better than enough, perfect. The years continued their march. 5 years after Alaska became 7, 7 became 10, Kara made commander at 35, was offered command positions, turned them down. Stayed in instruction because that's where she could have the most impact. That's where legacy was built, not in headlines or promotions, in the quiet preparation of people who'd face their own impossible moments. Her relationship with the civilian contractor had evolved into marriage, small ceremony, close friends only. No family hers had been small and distant and had never understood what she did or why it mattered. But his family embraced her, gave her a place at their table, treated her like she belonged even when she felt like a ghost pretending to be human. They had a daughter, born on a cold January morning exactly 10 years after Alaska. They named her Casey, not after anyone specific, just a name they both liked. But Kara secretly thought of Petty Officer Jackson Hayes and the photo of his infant daughter that had been taped to his helmet. Thought about how that image had been part of what pushed her to take the shot, part of what made the choice possible. Casey would never know that, would grow up thinking her mother was an instructor at a naval facility, would learn to shoot because that's what children of military parents did, would carry forward a legacy she couldn't understand. Because the best legacies were invisible. On Casey's first birthday, Kara received a package, no return address. Inside was a photo. Showed people at what looked like a reunion. All ages, all wearing casual clothes, all gathered around a banner that read Blackstone Ridge Survivors 10 Years. There was no note, no explanation. Just the photo and a small card with coordinates written in familiar handwriting. McLeish's handwriting. She recognized the coordinates, a military cemetery in Virginia, Section 47, Row 12. 3 days later, Kara drove to the cemetery, found the section, found the row, found a grave marker that was newer than those around it. Colonel Jacob McLeish, 1950 to 2024, father, soldier, teacher. He kept them honest. Kara knelt by the stone, set down the compass that had belonged to his father, the one she'd carried for 10 years, the one that had kept her honest when everything else was chaos. "Thank you," she whispered, "for believing, for understanding, for being the person who saw something in me I couldn't see in myself." She stayed there for an hour, talking to a man who couldn't hear but somehow still listened, telling him about Casey, about her marriage, about the students who were operating around the world, making decisions based on lessons he'd taught her to teach them. When she finally stood to leave, she noticed something. A single bullet casing placed carefully on the headstone. Brass, 7.62 millimeter, probably fired from an M110 sniper rifle. She smiled. Someone else had been here, someone who knew, who understood, who'd paid respects to the man who'd trained the ghost who'd saved them. Kara added the compass to the memorial. Legacy complete, duty fulfilled, honor maintained. She walked back to her car, drove home to her daughter and her husband and her life. The life she'd almost lost, the life others had almost lost, the life that continued because people made hard choices when no one was watching. That night, after Casey was asleep and her husband was reading, Kara sat on their back porch watching stars appear in the darkening sky. She thought about trajectories, about bullets that flew for 1.4 seconds before changing everything, about decisions made in frozen hides that echoed through decades. She thought about Hutchins, about the people she'd saved, about McLeish, about every student she'd taught and would teach, about the invisible lines connecting them all, about the way one choice cascaded into thousands of other choices made by people who'd never know her name. That was the truth of it, the real legacy. Not the shot, not the recognition, not the medals or commendations or official records. The legacy was every operator who came home because someone had taught them to be better. Every family that stayed intact because someone had prepared their soldier for the moments that mattered. Every future that existed because the past had been honored through present action. Her daughter would grow up in a world protected by people Kara would never meet, people taught by people she'd taught, a chain extending forward into time, invisible but unbreakable, silent but profound. Somewhere in America, a young woman was qualifying as a sniper. Somewhere else, an operator was making a difficult decision under pressure. Somewhere else, a team was extracting safely because their preparation had been thorough and their skills had been honed by instructors who knew what failure looked like and refused to accept it. All of it connected, all of it mattered. All of it traced back through training and experience and the moments when people chose right over easy. Kara went inside, kissed her sleeping daughter, held her husband, went to bed in a warm house in a safe neighborhood in a country protected by people who made hard choices. And for the first time in 10 years, she slept without dreaming of cold. 20 years after Alaska, at age 45, Commander Kara Brennan retired from the Navy with full honors and a service record that showed nothing exceptional except 2 decades of exemplary instruction. The ceremony was small. Her students now scattered across every command sent messages. Many attended. They spoke about her impact, about lessons learned, about moments when her voice had echoed in their heads and helped them make the right call. None of them knew about Alaska. None of them knew about the shot that had saved lives. None of them needed to know. What they knew was enough, that she'd prepared them, believed in them, pushed them to be better than they thought possible. That was the only legacy that mattered. After the ceremony, she drove to Montana, to a ranch 40 miles from anywhere, to a place where mountains touched sky and silence was sacred. She'd bought it 5 years earlier, planned for this moment, prepared for the transition from warrior to whatever came next. Her husband and daughter were waiting. They'd moved out 2 weeks earlier, made the house a home, created space for the next chapter. Casey was 10 now, smart, strong, already showing signs of the determination that ran through both sides of her family, even though she'd never know exactly what form that determination had taken in her mother's life. That evening, as the sun set over the mountains, Casey asked the question Kara had been expecting for years. "Mom, why do you always count when you're worried?" Kara looked at her daughter, saw innocence and curiosity and the beginning of understanding that adults carried weights children couldn't see. "Because that's how many reasons I have to be grateful." "That's a lot of reasons." "Yes, baby, it is." "What are they?" Kara smiled. "They're people I knew, people who taught me things, people who reminded me that sometimes being brave means doing the right thing even when it costs you everything." "Were you brave, Mom?" "Once, when it mattered most, and every day since I've tried to teach other people to be brave when their moments come." Casey seemed satisfied with that answer. She went back to her book. Left Kara sitting on the porch watching stars appear, each one burning bright in the darkness, each one a reminder that legacy wasn't about recognition. It was about impact, about the ripples extending outward from a single choice made in a frozen hide 20 years ago. Kara closed her eyes, breathed, counted, each number a life, each life a universe of possibility, each possibility a reason to have made the choice. Even now, even 20 years later, even when the cold was just a memory and the shot was just mathematics and Alaska was just a story nobody believed. It had been worth it. Every moment, every consequence, every price paid, that was the answer. That was the legacy. That was the truth that made everything else bearable. One shot, one choice, one moment when everything changed, and all the reasons why courage mattered more than orders. Why conscience mattered more than career. Why being human mattered more than being perfect. Kara Brennan understood that now. The story didn't end with the shot. It began there, and continued through every moment that followed, through every student taught and every lesson learned and every choice made by people who would never know her name, but carried her legacy nonetheless. That was enough. More than enough. Perfect. The ghost who had saved lives had become the teacher who saved generations. The woman who had violated orders had become the commander who taught the value of judgment. The shooter who had made an impossible shot had become the mother who taught her daughter that impossible just meant difficult. And somewhere in the cold, dark north, in a town that nobody remembered and a battle that never officially happened, the wind still blew through empty buildings. But they'd walked out, against all odds, against all probability, against every tactical assessment that said they were already dead. They'd walked out because one woman had chosen courage, had chosen right, had chosen to be the person the moment required even when the moment required everything. That was the truth, the only truth that mattered. And Kara Brennan carried it forward. Every day, every lesson, every breath, a legacy built not in recognition but in the quiet moments when people chose right over easy, when they made hard calls with no one watching, when they became the person they needed to be. That was honor, that was duty, that was the difference between surviving and living. And that was all any ghost could ask for.